Hi everyone. I'm still playing with this technology, and so this is going to be a little not smooth. Um, so I'm trying to speak before going to the PowerPoint, and in the PowerPoint you're going to yet again get exposed to my cartoon-like mind to try and summarize some of what we are reading this week. Now we're in to the phase of talking about what is science. We've been talking about how science arose and the kind of worldviews and conflicts amongst worldviews that happened over history before science arose, and then after science arose, what effects did that have? And but in there somewhere all the way along has been a question of, well, what is science? And before science, it was really a question of what is this this other kind of knowing that we seem to have the ability to do through reasoning and observation through the senses. And today, as we in our culture think about science, we assume that we know exactly what science is. And it turns out when you really dig into it, we really don't know what science is. And that has always been a very interesting thing to me. And so we're going to get exposed to that this week and right away, first by looking at how science progresses. So actually, the very idea of progress didn't exist before the scientific revolution. So the idea that we were progressing towards some end didn't even exist prior to the scientific revolution. So, and now today we have the idea that or at least I had the idea, I walked around with this idea that as a scientist, we were progressing towards something, that we were gradually sort of hacking our way towards the truth. That there was a truth, that there was an absolute world independent of my mind, of myself, that we were going to arrive at someday in various domains of science. And I just automatically assumed that, and I think our society assumes that as science advances, it advances towards an absolute truth of some kind. And that, in recent times, that view has increasingly come under question. And so it's important that we know about that questioning of science, that we actually realize that we don't really know what science is or what science does or what it is we're really discovering and through science. And for me, this opens up when I start to really see the sort of mystery. There's an underlying mystery around the whole scientific process that opens up a kind of the avenues towards a spiritual view of science for me. So right up front, we're going to talk about how science progresses, which is fundamental to the idea of science. That through data and experiment, we progress towards some kind of truth. We get closer and closer to the truth. And we're going to go through that now. Our ideas about that have got exploded in the middle of the last century. And it's not entirely clear where we stand today on that. Okay, so this is going to be my more of your exposure to my cartoon-like mind, and just to talk about the idea of scientific progress and to sort of illustrate some of the uncertainties. There's a lot more complexities of this, but this is the simple cartoon version. So the idea is that the truth is out there. So it exists. whether or not I exist, whether or not I'm alive, whether or not anyone's alive, the truth is there. The physical world exists independently from us and from our minds. And so this really represents the view coming from positivism, and it's this idea of progress towards an existing truth. And so what we do is we start out with some theory that gets tested with data, and we make a new theory based on more data, and that moves us a little bit towards the truth. And then with more data, as more data comes in, we may modify that new theory, and that moves us a little bit closer to the truth. More data, further modification of the theory, even more data comes in, more technology arises, we invent new machines to gather different kinds of data. Maybe we need an entirely new theory, but in each step gets us closer and closer to the truth, even though we can't actually ever say that we've arrived at the truth. And this is the idea that's from logical positivism, and I think today we could sort of perhaps lump that into the category of scientific realism, which is really, I think that in an unquestioned sense, we as a society carry around this view that science is advancing towards this truth that is out there somewhere, but we haven't got there yet. But one day, perhaps, hopefully, we will get to the bottom of it all via this method. So let's look at this another way. As we advance towards the truth, we got an area, let's call this an area that here, where we call it the known. It's now, this is what we know now. And surrounding that area is a zone where it's a zone of, we know what we don't, it's what we don't know, but we don't know it. Okay, so that's the area of scientific questioning. It's like, okay, I've gotten to this point on the very edge of the known, and I know that out here there's something more to know, and I know roughly what that is, so I can ask questions about it. Okay, I know enough to ask questions. This is the area where I know enough to ask questions about this. So, and the idea that in the previous slide is that what happens is that the area of the known grows. Okay, so we know more and more. And of course, as the known grows, then that zone around it of what we know we don't know also grows. And it just gets bigger and bigger. Okay, what we know we don't know also actually expands, strangely enough, as the known expands, because the area around this edge grows too. Now, scientists, here's my cartoon, two scientists, hang out at this edge, the edge of the known. And so you're always inquiring into the zone of what we know we don't know. I know I don't know quite how this thing works. I know I don't quite know why the universe is accelerating in its expansion. So I can ask a question about that. I know I don't know that, and I'm going to ask questions about that, for example. So, and that is the zone of science, okay? And that model of this known getting bigger and bigger is the model that we have. It's the positivist model. But there's this bizarre conflict here, which is that what we know we don't know also expands. So as the known expands, then what we know we don't know expands. So actually the question marks multiply. And that's the experience of being a scientist, is that if you feel like you very rarely do you feel like you actually answer a question, because whatever you do, it leads to more questions. and the questions seem to proliferate, and faster than you can actually sort of gather them all in. So it's science is really a question generating machine in this sense, and that's not normally how we think of it. So then this model of the gradually expanding known, in your reading this time from the philosophy of science, turns out to be not exactly accurate in terms of how science actually progresses. And this is an example of a quote that happened at the turn of the last century. So in 1900, there was a quote, and it's variously attributed to Lord Kelvin or Albert Michelson, both physicists, that there is nothing new to be discovered in physics now. All that remains is more and more precise measurement. So in other words, in 1900, they thought that they had basically discovered it all, and that it's just a matter of refining it from that point forward. And of course, that's what we think today. So, but 5 years later, Albert Einstein came along. The theory of relativity was put forth, and a few years later, quantum physics came along. The entire field of physics was turned on its head, and an entirely new view of the physical universe arose. And these people had no idea that this was coming. So that's not quite this piecewise advance towards truth. It looks more like this. So here we have the known and what we don't know. And then along comes an event like this one, and we throw it all out, okay? We throw that paradigm out and we replace it with a new one. And that's happened numerous times in the history of science, within all the various different fields. And the famous cases in physics, I mean, Copernicus was one. I think Newton was another. Well, if you combine Newton and Galileo and Descartes, that's another. Einstein, and then all the various physicists involved in quantum mechanics. That was another one. Well, basically, we just throw everything that we thought before. Throw out Aristotelian physics, and bring in the new physics and Newtonian physics. Throw out Newtonian physics, bring in Einsteinian physics and quantum physics, etc. And it's not a piecewise advance. It's an entire replacement of it. So and that's what's called a paradigm shift. So these paradigm shifts aren't this easy linear sort of hacking your way towards an external truth. When we get these kinds of things happening, then science actually becomes a lot more mysterious, because where do these huge revolutions come from? And how do we know there's not one just around the corner? So that we can never be sure that all the little chipping away towards truth that we're doing today, well, all of that won't be actually tomorrow thrown out, and some entirely new approach come in. And so this makes science, the revolution here from Thomas Kuhn was that this made science really not linear, not predictable, and it wasn't, the mechanisms by which these shifts happen weren't entirely clear to delineate. So there was this, the shock of it, realizing that the history of science didn't proceed in that controlled way that we thought. It was that it made science seem somewhat irrational, that there was an irrational component to science. So now it's important to add, for me at least, this is not Thomas Kuhn, now we're going to shift a little bit beyond it, to add in something else here. So we have the known, and they have what we know we don't know. And so relevant to this paradigm shift is that there's a zone around that is what we don't know, right? So there's the known, what we know we don't know, and then there's what we don't know, and we've got no idea about what we don't know. We have no idea about that, and that is the kind of thing that can upset the entire apple cart. And we don't know if our known is large compared to what we don't know, or if what we know is small compared to what we don't know. In fact, we don't know if what can be known is infinite. In other words, we can never arrive at that truth, that point that the positivists thought we could arrive at. And so that, if that were true, and I personally believe that it is, then we are, what we know is forever embedded in a deep mystery. And for me, this is one of the ways in which learning about how science operates can pull us through to a place where we see that underlying this is the mysterious. In fact, underlying all of this is something that might be called spiritual. And just as a final point, in today's world, we actually know how big, we can say that we know how big what we know we don't know is, because we think that 96% of the universe is made of dark matter and dark energy, and we don't know what dark matter and dark energy is. The part of the universe that we work with, all of our science, all of our entire existence, all the stars, galaxies, make up only 4% of what we think the universe is, and we don't know what 96% of the rest of it is. So we know we don't know it, we can ask questions about it, and then surrounding that is, again, of unknown magnitude, what we don't know, we don't know. I think that's, so the question is, yes, what is our relationship to mystery? Okay, so that is the cartoon lecture for this week. Okay.